At 9, my parents abandoned me at a bus station with just a sketchbook. 20 years later, they tricked me into a meeting because they needed my signature for the family insurance. I showed the whole town their old letter. Stop contacting us. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old now, and for most of my life, I avoided bus stations. Not because I was afraid of buses, because the last time my family felt like a family ended at 1. I was 9 years old when my mother took me to Cedar Creek Station. It was a small terminal on the edge of town. A few benches, a ticket counter, and buses coming and going all day. Back then, I thought we were taking a trip together. That morning, my mother, Patricia, told me to pack a bag. I didn't know what to bring, so I grabbed my favorite sketchbook and a short pencil. That was it. When I got into the car, my older brother Jason was already in the front seat. He was 12. The drive was quiet. The radio played softly while nobody explained where we were going. Are we visiting someone? I asked. No answer. A few minutes later, I tried again. How long are we staying? My mother sighed. Emily, just relax. So I stopped asking. When we arrived, she parked beside the terminal and shut off the engine. Then she turned toward me. Grab your bag. I picked up my sketchbook and followed her outside. A cold breeze moved through the parking lot. My oversized jacket did little to help. We stopped beside an empty bench. Sit here, she said. I sat. She exchanged a quick glance with Jason. One of those silent conversations that made it obvious everyone knew something except me. Stay here for a little while. Okay? Don't go anywhere. I won't. She nodded and turned away. Jason followed her back toward the car. I wasn't worried. Parents leave kids alone for a few minutes all the time. Maybe they were buying tickets. Maybe they forgot something. The engine started. I waited. The car backed out. I waited. Then Jason rolled down his window. I give her 10 minutes. My mother looked at him. 5. They both laughed. I frowned. Jason leaned farther out. You want to bet? My mother shook her head. No, she'll last longer than 5. Then Jason looked directly at me. Don't cry, Emily. The car drove away. At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe they'd circle around the lot. Maybe they were trying to scare me. So I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 20. The smile slowly disappeared. People came and went. Buses arrived and left. Nobody came back for me. I watched every car that entered the parking lot. Every time headlights appeared, my heart jumped. Every time, it was someone else. An hour passed, then another. The air got colder. I opened my sketchbook and started drawing random lines just to keep busy. My hands wouldn't stay steady. I kept looking toward the road, still waiting. Eventually, I checked inside the terminal. Maybe I'd somehow missed them. Maybe they were waiting for me in there. They weren't. I returned to the bench and sat down again. That's the strange thing about being a child. You keep believing your parents are coming back even when everything says they aren't, because the alternative is too big to understand. The sky was beginning to darken when I finally noticed a woman sitting several benches away. Gray streaks in her hair, reading glasses pushed onto her head, a paperback book open in her lap. I wasn't sure how long she'd been there. For a while, she simply watched. Not in a creepy way, more like she was trying to figure something out. I looked away. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Slow, unhurried. She stopped beside my bench, then she sat down. Not too close, just close enough. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned toward me and asked, "Have you eaten today?" I looked up at her and shook my head. That was the first thing I said to her. Or technically, the first thing I didn't say. She nodded like she'd expected that answer. Okay. No lecture, no panic, no 20 questions. Just okay. She stood up and walked toward a vending machine near the terminal entrance. A minute later, she came back holding a paper cup. Hot chocolate. She handed it to me carefully. It's hot. I wrapped both hands around it. The warmth felt good. I hadn't realized how cold I'd gotten. The woman sat back down and opened her book again. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. That probably sounds strange. An adult finding a child alone at a bus station and not immediately demanding answers. But looking back, I think that's why I trusted her. She wasn't trying to force anything. She was just there. Eventually, she closed her book. My name is Eleanor. I looked down at the cup. Emily. Nice to meet you, Emily. Then she waited. Not fishing for details, not interrogating me, just giving me space. I don't remember exactly what made me start talking. Maybe it was the hot chocolate. Maybe it was the fact that she seemed calm when I felt anything but. My mom said she'd come back. Eleanor nodded. Okay. My brother too. Another nod. Okay. The sky had gone dark by then. The buses were less frequent. The parking lot looked bigger somehow, emptier. Eleanor glanced toward the road, then back at me. How long have you been here? I shrugged. A while. She looked at the empty lot. Something changed in her face. Not panic, concern. The kind adults get when they realize a situation is worse than they hoped. A few minutes later, she stood. I'm going to make a phone call. I felt my stomach drop. Are you calling my mom? No. Then who? She hesitated. People who can help. I didn't like that answer. At 9 years old, I didn't want help. I wanted my family. Still, I watched her walk toward the payphone near the terminal office. She talked for several minutes, occasionally glancing back at me, making sure I was still there. I was. Where else was I supposed to go? The police arrived about 20 minutes later. 2 officers, 1 man, 1 woman. Neither looked angry. That surprised me. For some reason, I'd assumed police officers were angry all the time. The female officer crouched beside me. Hi, Emily. I nodded. I'm Officer Ramirez. She asked simple questions. My age, my address, my mother's name, my brother's name. I answered all of them. The answers came out flat, like I was reading from a worksheet. Eleanor stayed nearby the entire time, not hovering, just present. The officers spoke quietly with her for a few minutes. Then they made some calls. More waiting. By that point, waiting felt like my full-time job. Eventually, Officer Ramirez came back. Emily, we're trying to reach your mother. I nodded. Okay. I expected relief. Instead, I felt nervous. Something wasn't fitting together anymore. If my mother had simply forgotten me, why wasn't she already here? Why hadn't she come back? The officers moved toward the terminal office. The walls weren't exactly soundproof, and kids hear more than adults realize. I sat in a plastic chair near the doorway. Eleanor sat beside me. Neither of us spoke. Then I heard part of the conversation. A voice through speakerphone. Thin, sharp, familiar. My mother's. She ran off. The officer's voice stayed calm. Ma'am, your daughter was located at Cedar Creek Station. Like I said, she runs off. I stared at the floor. Runs off? I had never run away anywhere. Not once. The officer continued. She's 9 years old. A pause. Then my mother again. She's difficult. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were loud, because they sounded prepared. Like she'd said them before. Like she'd already decided who I was. The conversation continued, mostly too quiet to hear. Then another pause, longer this time. The officer stepped away from the desk and rubbed her forehead. That felt important. Adults usually do that when things aren't going well. A few minutes later, she walked back toward us. I looked up immediately. The question came out before I could stop it. Is my mom coming? Officer Ramirez glanced toward her partner, then toward Eleanor. Nobody answered right away. That's another thing kids notice. When adults delay a simple answer, the silence tells you almost everything. Finally, Eleanor reached over and gently squeezed my shoulder. Not enough to trap me. Just enough to remind me someone was there. And for the first time that entire day, I didn't feel completely alone. Then I heard Officer Ramirez quietly say to another officer standing nearby, she declined to come get her? The room suddenly felt very still. She declined to come get her. I wish I could tell you I cried. I didn't. I just sat there, holding an empty paper cup of hot chocolate while adults talked around me. At 9 years old, I only understood one thing. My mother knew where I was, and she wasn't coming. The county placed me in emergency foster care that night. My social worker was named Linda. She wore bright sneakers and carried a folder that seemed to grow thicker every time I saw her. She tried hard. Back then, I mostly answered her questions with one word. How are you doing today? Fine. Need anything? No. None of it was true. The first foster home wasn't bad. Neither was the second. The families were decent, kind even, but kindness and belonging aren't the same thing. I had a bed, I had meals, I had clean clothes. I just never unpacked completely. Part of me kept expecting to leave. Every time the phone rang, I wondered if it was my mother. Every time Linda arrived, I looked up a little too quickly. A few weeks became months. School started. Then holidays came. Then winter. Life kept moving while I felt stuck. One afternoon, I sat outside Linda's office coloring while she made another phone call. The door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen, I just couldn't avoid hearing it. Mrs. Carter, we're still willing to arrange visitation. Pause. We can transport Emily. Another pause. Longer this time. I kept coloring. Blue marker, then green, then blue again. Linda's voice dropped. Understood. When she walked out, she smiled. The kind adults use when they don't want children asking questions. I didn't ask, but I knew. Nobody says, understood, during a happy conversation. Months later, there was another attempt. This one involved official paperwork. Certified mail, signatures. The kind of things adults trust more than people. I only learned the details years later. My mother never signed for the letter. Her husband did. Attached was a short written response. Nothing dramatic, just cold. There wasn't room for me? That's how they described it. Like I was furniture. Like I was a storage problem. Around that time, something inside me started shutting down. I stopped asking when I could go home. I stopped asking whether my mother had called. I stopped wondering what excuse would come next. Acceptance isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's just exhaustion. Every Thursday, Eleanor visited. Without fail. Rain, snow, didn't matter. She showed up. The first few visits were awkward, mostly because I didn't know what to do with someone who kept coming back. She brought books, mysteries, adventure stories, kids solving problems adults couldn't. One week, she brought me a new sketchbook. I thought yours might be getting full. I stared at it. Thanks. That was all I said. But I kept it. Every week, she remembered something I'd mentioned before. A teacher's name. A book I liked. A drawing I was working on. Small things. Things my own family had never seemed to notice. One afternoon, she found me reading outside. You've gotten taller, I shrugged. I guess. Pretty soon you'll be taller than me. I looked at her. That seemed impossible. She smiled. I smiled back for half a second before pretending I hadn't. That became our rhythm. No speeches, no promises, just consistency. Week after week. They don't disappear. More than a year passed. 13 months, according to Linda's records. Long enough for birthdays and holidays. Long enough for me to stop expecting the phone to ring. One afternoon, Linda picked me up from school. That wasn't unusual. The unusual part was seeing Eleanor waiting in her office. Both women looked nervous, which immediately made me nervous. I dropped my backpack beside a chair. Did I do something wrong? Linda laughed softly. No. Eleanor looked down at her hands, then back at me. For the first time since I'd met her, she seemed unsure. Finally, she cleared her throat. Emily. She slid a stack of papers across the desk. I filed an application this morning. I looked from her to Linda. Neither spoke. Then Eleanor took a breath and said, I've asked the court if I can become your mother. I've asked the court if I can become your mother. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Linda looked at me. Eleanor looked at me. I looked at the papers. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. Most kids probably would have been excited. I wasn't. Not because I didn't like Eleanor, I did. But by then, I'd learned something important. Adults could leave. Adults could change their minds. So instead of smiling, I asked, what if you change your mind too? The room went quiet. Linda glanced toward Eleanor. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Then she said, I can't promise life will always be easy, Emily. I stared at her. But I can promise that if you're part of my family, I won't walk away. No dramatic speech, just honesty. And somehow, that felt more believable. The adoption process took time. Court hearings, home visits, endless paperwork. Through all of it, Eleanor stayed exactly the same. No pressure, no guilt, just consistency. One afternoon, she picked me up from school and asked, Want to see your room? I looked at her. My room? She smiled. If everything goes through, yes. That was the first time I let myself imagine it. Not a foster room, not a temporary room. Mine. The house sat on a quiet street lined with old trees. A white two-story home with a crooked mailbox and a garden full of roses and lavender. It wasn't fancy. It felt lived in, comfortable, like it had stories. Eleanor showed me around casually. Kitchen, living room, bookshelves everywhere. Then she opened a bedroom door. There was a desk by the window, a bookshelf, and enough space for me. I stepped inside carefully, almost like the room might disappear if I moved too fast. You can change anything you want, Eleanor said. The paint, the furniture. I looked around and shook my head. I like it, she smiled. That was another thing about Eleanor. She knew when silence was enough. The adoption became official a few months later. No giant celebration. Just a courtroom, a judge, Linda, and Eleanor. The judge asked if I understood what was happening. I said yes. The truth? I only understood part of it. I understood that someone had chosen me. That part was enough. Living with Eleanor felt strange at first. Not bad, just strange. She'd ask how school was and actually wait for the answer. She remembered things. If I mentioned a test, she'd ask about it later. If I liked a book, she'd find another by the same author. At first, I kept expecting a catch. There wasn't one. One evening, I accidentally broke a plate while helping with dinner. The crash echoed through the kitchen. I froze. My stomach dropped. I immediately started apologizing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... Are you hurt? Eleanor interrupted. I blinked. What? Your hands. The plate wasn't what she cared about. I wasn't used to that. Sometimes trust doesn't grow during big moments. Sometimes it grows over broken dishes. The months turned into years. School became easier. I made friends, joined activities, started filling sketchbooks again. One afternoon, I asked Eleanor a question I'd carried for years. Do you ever wish you'd help someone else instead? She looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? At the bus station. She set her book down. Emily, helping you wasn't a project. Then she added, the worst thing that happened to you doesn't get to decide who you become. That sentence stayed with me. She never told me to forget my past. She just refused to let it define me. By high school, people stopped seeing me as the girl from foster care. I was just Emily. And for the first time, that felt like enough. I graduated near the top of my class. Then college, then graduate school. Every milestone felt less like proving people wrong and more like honoring the person who stayed. Years passed. The scared little girl from Cedar Creek Station slowly disappeared. In her place was someone with purpose, someone building a future. The day I accepted a position leading a children's literacy program, Eleanor smiled across the dinner table. Then she said something that made me put my fork down. Your mother called the house today. I just stared at Eleanor. For a second, I felt 9 years old again. Not 23, not a college graduate, just a little girl waiting for a car that never came back. What did she want? I asked. Eleanor shrugged. She didn't say. That answer bothered me more than I expected. Did you call her back? No. And that was it. No discussion, no pressure. Honestly, I appreciated that. Years earlier, I would have obsessed over the call. Now I had other things to focus on. I finished graduate school and joined Maplewood Children's Literacy Center. The work mattered to me immediately. Many of the children came from difficult situations. Some struggled in school, others struggled with things far bigger than school. I recognized that look in their eyes, the look of kids who had learned not to expect much from adults. I wanted the center to be different, a place where children felt noticed, the way Eleanor had noticed me. One promotion led to another. Eventually, I became executive director. The first person I called was Eleanor. She laughed before I finished telling her. I knew you'd get there. No, you hoped I would. I said what I said. That was Eleanor. Steady. Certain. The older she got, the more I noticed small changes. Longer naps, slower walks through the lavender garden, reading glasses constantly disappearing. Nothing alarming at first, just time doing what time does. One evening, we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. You know, she said, I never worried about what would happen to you. I laughed. That's definitely not true. It is. She looked out toward the garden. I only worried about how long it would take you to see yourself the way everyone else did. I didn't have an answer for that. So we sat quietly and watched the sky darken. A few years later, doctors told us her heart was failing. Eleanor handled the news the same way she handled everything else, calmly. She never wasted energy pretending reality wasn't real. Even in the hospital, she kept asking about the literacy center, the children, the reading programs. One afternoon, she squeezed my hand. Promise me something. Okay? Keep helping kids. I smiled. I promise. A few weeks later, Eleanor Brooks passed away peacefully. I was holding her hand. The funeral wasn't large, but it was full. Former students, neighbors, friends, people I'd never met. Everywhere I turned, someone had a story about Eleanor helping them. A ride home, a recommendation letter, a small act of kindness they never forgot. None of it surprised me. It sounded exactly like her. When the estate was settled, I inherited the house, the garden, and her books. That already felt priceless. Then her attorney handed me several sealed document boxes. She wanted these to go directly to you. What are they? Letters, records, personal files. I had never seen them before. The boxes stayed unopened in my office for months. Every time I looked at them, I told myself I'd deal with them later. Life stayed busy. The literacy center expanded. New programs launched. The boxes collected dust. Then, 2 years after Eleanor's funeral, my phone started vibrating during a budget meeting. I ignored it. A few minutes later, it rang again. And again. By lunch, I finally checked. 23 missed calls, all from numbers I didn't recognize. While I stared at the screen, another call came in, then another, then another. Another call came through. Same area code, same unknown number. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. Hello? Silence. Then a man's voice. Emily? My stomach tightened immediately. I knew that voice. Not because I had heard it recently, because some voices get buried in your memory and stay there. Jason? I said. There was a pause. Yeah, 20 years. More than 20 years without a birthday card, a phone call, or a single message. And suddenly, he was on my phone. Neither of us spoke for a moment. It was awkward in a way I can't fully explain. We were technically siblings, but strangers too. Finally, he cleared his throat. Mom's sick. There it was. Not hello, not how have you been, not I'm sorry. Straight to business. I leaned back in my chair. Okay? The words seemed to surprise him. Okay? What do you want me to say, Jason? Another silence. She's dying. I looked out the office window. Parents got sick. Parents died. That was life. But Patricia Carter had stopped being my parent a long time ago. That's unfortunate, I said. His voice hardened. Emily, she's still your mother. No. The answer came out faster than I expected. No, Eleanor Brooks was my mother. Jason exhaled sharply, like he had expected resistance, but not that much. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then he changed tactics. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I almost laughed. 20 years of silence wasn't a bad start to a conversation. It was the absence of one. What exactly do you want? I asked. Finally, the real reason surfaced. We need you to come back to Ashford. Need, not want, need. I heard that word and immediately became suspicious. Why? It's complicated. Then explain it. His patience started slipping. There are family matters that need to be handled. Family matters. I hadn't been considered family since I was 9. Now suddenly, I was essential. Interesting. I have a job. You can take a few days? I don't know you. That one landed. Jason went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. We've made mistakes. Mistakes. Like forgetting milk at the grocery store. Not abandoning a child at a bus station. I rubbed my forehead. The conversation was exhausting. Jason, if this is about reconciliation, you're doing a terrible job. It's not about reconciliation. The words escaped before he could stop them. Then he immediately corrected himself. I mean, not only that, but it was too late. I had heard the truth. This wasn't about healing old wounds. It was about something else, something practical, something they wanted. I'll think about it, I said. Emily, The line disconnected. For several minutes, I just sat there staring at my desk. A photo of Eleanor sat beside my computer. One of my favorites. She was standing in the lavender garden, squinting at the camera because she hated having her picture taken. I found myself talking to the photo. Can you believe this? The photo offered no advice. Unfortunately, over the next week, Jason called 6 more times. Then Patricia called. Then another number, then another. Voicemails started appearing. None of them contained an apology, not one. The messages all sounded strangely urgent. Call us back. We need to discuss something. This concerns the family. The family. The phrase kept appearing, as if repeating it would magically erase 2 decades. Eventually, I contacted Eleanor's estate attorney, Robert Foster, mostly because something felt off. The story wasn't adding up. We met in his office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I explained everything, the calls, the messages, Jason's sudden interest in reconnecting. Robert listened quietly. Then he pulled a folder from a cabinet. There's something I should probably show you. That immediately got my attention. What is it? He adjusted his glasses. A few months ago, I received an inquiry from a law firm in Ashford. My stomach tightened. Ashford, he nodded. The same town where your biological family lives? I sat forward. Why would they contact you? That's what bothered me. He opened the folder. Several documents sat inside. Legal correspondence, property records, insurance paperwork. I didn't recognize most of it. Robert slid one page across the desk. I couldn't understand why they suddenly became interested in locating you. I looked down at the document, then back at him. What did you find? Robert's expression changed. Not shocked, not angry, just confused. The kind of expression lawyers make when facts don't make sense. He tapped the page with one finger. Because according to these records, your mother's illness isn't the reason they're looking for you. I stared at him. Then what is? Robert opened another file, and the answer was sitting inside. Robert opened the file and slid several documents across the desk. I expected insurance paperwork, maybe property records. Instead, I found notes, names, dates, references to community organizations and church contacts. I looked up. What exactly am I looking at? Robert folded his hands. Before I advised you to respond to your family, I wanted to understand why they suddenly needed you. What did you find? Enough to make me uncomfortable. He turned another page toward me. A familiar name appeared near the top. Helen Foster. I recognized it immediately. Helen was one of Eleanor's closest friends and a retired social worker. What does Helen have to do with this? Robert nodded. She grew up in Ashford. After hearing about the calls from Jason, Helen became curious, and unlike most people, she knew how to find answers, not through gossip, through conversations, records, and local history. A few days later, Helen met me for coffee. She arrived carrying a notebook, never a good sign. I need to ask you something, she said. Okay, how much do you know about what your family told people after you disappeared? I frowned. I never thought about it. Helen sighed. Neither did I, until recently. A knot formed in my stomach. What did they say? She opened the notebook. Emily, most people in Ashford don't believe you were abandoned. I stared at her. What? They believe you ran away? I was 9. 9-year-olds don't run away to bus stations carrying a sketchbook. Helen continued carefully. According to the version people heard for years, you were a troubled child. I let out a short laugh. I got straight A's. I know. They left me. I know. But apparently, most of Ashford didn't. Over the years, Patricia built an entirely different story. According to neighbors, church members, and family friends, I had become difficult, rebellious, ungrateful. Some even believed I refused all contact. Every version ended the same way. Patricia was the grieving mother. I was the problem. Suddenly, a lot made sense. The silence, the lack of questions. Nobody had ignored what happened. They had been told something else. Helen shook her head. The scary part is how many people believed it. Why wouldn't they? Most people trust parents, especially mothers active in church. Helen nodded. For years, she repeated the same story. Emily ran away. Emily rejected the family. Emily chose to leave. Eventually, repetition became truth, at least for the people hearing it. I stared out the cafe window. Families walked by. Life looked normal. Meanwhile, I was learning my own history had been rewritten. Not accidentally, deliberately. You know what's strange? I said. Helen waited. I always assumed they forgot about me. She frowned. What do you mean? If someone never calls or visits, eventually you assume they moved on. I paused. But this is worse. Because forgetting takes silence. This took effort. Years of explanations. Years of making sure nobody questioned my disappearance. Helen reached into her bag. I found something else. She handed me a photocopied church newsletter. At first, it looked harmless. Then I saw Patricia's name. Beneath it was a sentence thanking the congregation for supporting her family through the loss of a daughter who chose to leave. My grip tightened on the paper. I wasn't missing. I wasn't lost. I was sitting in foster care, waiting for a mother who knew exactly where I was. Yet somehow, she convinced an entire community that I had abandoned them. Patricia hadn't just left me at Cedar Creek Station, she had erased me. And judging by the stack of documents Helen had uncovered, she wasn't finished rewriting the story yet. Let's stop pretending. The words came out before Jason could finish another one of his carefully rehearsed explanations. We were sitting across from each other in a small restaurant just outside Ashford. Neutral ground. His idea. Apparently, he thought meeting in public would make the conversation easier. It didn't. Jason looked older than I remembered. More tired, too. The confidence he carried as a teenager had been replaced by something else. Stress, maybe. Desperation. I wasn't sure. What do you mean? He asked. I folded my arms. I mean, stop talking about Mom's health. His jaw tightened. She's sick. I didn't say she wasn't. I leaned forward slightly. But that's not why you've called me 30 times. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked away. That told me everything? People usually look you in the eye when they're telling the truth. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he sighed. You've always been stubborn. I almost laughed. 20 years of silence, and that was his opening move. No, I've just gotten better at recognizing when someone wants something. The waiter arrived with drinks. Neither of us touched them. The second he walked away, Jason rubbed his forehead. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it. For once, he actually did. Not immediately. But little pieces started slipping out. The family finances weren't good. Patricia's medical bills had grown. There were legal issues involving property that had belonged to our grandparents, insurance payouts, land ownership, paperwork. The more he talked, the less emotional the conversation became. It sounded less like a family reunion and more like a business meeting. Then he finally said it, the sentence he'd been avoiding. We can't move forward without your signature. There it was, the truth. I sat back in my chair, neither shocked nor surprised, just disappointed. What exactly needs my signature? Jason hesitated. That hesitation lasted a little too long. A family trust. I waited. And a land transfer. I kept waiting. His shoulders dropped. And part of the insurance settlement. Finally. Honesty. At least part of it. I stared at him. So that's why you found me. It's not that simple, isn't it? His expression hardened. Emily, this affects everyone. I nodded slowly. Interesting choice of words. Everyone. Not Mom, not the family. Everyone. Meaning money, meaning assets, meaning problems. The conversation had finally reached its destination. What happens if I refuse? Jason didn't answer right away. That answer told me more than words could. Jason. He looked down at the table. The process stalls. Meaning, the funds stay frozen. There it was. The real emergency, not Patricia's illness, not healing old wounds, money, property, access. For a second, I thought about the 9-year-old girl sitting at Cedar Creek Station. The one they left behind. The one they told everyone had run away. Now, somehow, that same child had become important. Not because they loved her, because they needed her signature. Jason must have seen something change in my expression. Look, I know how this sounds. You do? Yes. Then why are you still saying it? That landed harder than I intended. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. Good. I had spent years being uncomfortable because of choices his family made. A few minutes later, I stood up. The meeting was over. Jason rose too. Will you at least think about it? I'll review whatever documents you send. His face brightened slightly. Then I added, with my attorney. The expression disappeared immediately. That told me even more. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. For the first time since the phone call started, I understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't about reconciliation. It never had been. That evening, I returned to Eleanor's house. The lavender garden was quiet. The familiar scent drifted through the open window as I sat in my office. The old document boxes still sat against the wall. The same boxes I'd avoided for 2 years. For some reason, I suddenly wanted answers. Real answers. Not Jason's version, not Patricia's version, Eleanor's. I opened the first box. Letters, receipts, notes, old court documents. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Then I opened a smaller folder tucked beneath a stack of papers. Inside were 5 sealed envelopes, all addressed to Patricia Carter, all written in Eleanor's handwriting. None had ever been opened. I stared at the dates. The earliest one had been sent only weeks after I entered foster care. The latest was nearly 10 years later. 5 letters, 5 attempts, and judging by the untouched seals, not a single one had ever been read. The letters were sitting exactly where I'd left them. On the dining room table, 5 envelopes, 5 different years, 5 attempts. I stood there for a moment before opening the first one. Part of me already knew it wouldn't be easy. Part of me still hoped there would be something different inside. Some explanation, some sign that my mother had at least struggled with her decision. I opened the oldest letter carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's. Neat, thoughtful, patient. Not angry, not demanding. Just kind. Patricia, Emily is doing well in school. She loves reading and spends hours drawing. She asked about you again this week. If you'd ever like updates or a supervised contact, please let me know. That was it. No accusations, no guilt. Just an invitation. I swallowed hard and opened the second letter. This one was written nearly 2 years later. Emily won an art competition at school. I thought you might want to know. She's growing into a wonderful young lady. The third letter was similar, then the fourth. Every one of them carried the same tone. Respectful, hopeful. Eleanor had never tried to punish Patricia. She never tried to replace her. She simply kept leaving the door open. For years. I sat down and rubbed my forehead. The realization hit me harder than I expected. My mother hadn't been denied access to me. She'd been offered opportunities again and again. And every time, she'd chosen not to take them. The final envelope looked different. It was thicker, creased at the corners. The return address sticker was still attached. Something about it made my stomach tighten. I opened it slowly. Inside was Eleanor's last attempt, written when I was around 16. Old enough to understand abandonment, young enough to still hope. The letter itself was heartbreaking. Patricia, Emily is becoming an extraordinary young woman. I know many years have passed, but if there's any part of you that wishes to reconnect, I am willing to help facilitate that conversation. I stopped reading for a second. The room felt very quiet. Eleanor had been trying to help the woman who abandoned me. Not for Patricia's sake, for mine. I continued, no matter what happened in the past, Emily deserves the opportunity to know the truth. That sentence sat heavily in my chest, because Eleanor had always believed truth mattered, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it hurt. I unfolded the final page, and that's when I saw it. The letter had been returned unopened. Across the front, in thick black marker, someone had written, "Please stop contacting us. We've moved on." I stared at the words, then stared some more. The envelope had never been opened, not once. The seal was intact. Patricia hadn't read the letter, hadn't read about my school achievements, hadn't read about my life, hadn't read Eleanor's offer. She saw the sender's name and sent it back. That was all. For a few minutes, I couldn't move. 20 years of unanswered questions seemed to collapse into a single sentence. We've moved on. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I can't. Not, I don't know how. Just 3 words that made it clear I had never been forgotten. I had been dismissed. I thought I would cry. Instead, I felt strangely calm. The kind of calm that arrives when uncertainty finally disappears. For years, there had always been a tiny voice asking the same question. What if there was something I didn't know? Now I knew. The answer wasn't complicated. She simply didn't want me. And somehow, that truth hurt less than the fantasy I'd carried around for years. Because fantasies keep reopening wounds. Facts let them close. I gathered the letters and placed them back into their envelopes. Then I noticed something tucked underneath the stack. A program brochure. At the top was a familiar name. Eleanor Brooks Children's Learning Center Annual Gala. I smiled despite everything. The event was only a few days away. Every year, we hosted a fundraising gala for literacy programs, scholarships, and family support services. This year would be the biggest one yet. Donors, community leaders, teachers, local media. Nearly everyone connected to the center would be there. I flipped through the schedule. Near the end of the evening was a note highlighted by my assistant. Closing address. Emily Carter Wright. The speech. I had completely forgotten about it. My laptop sat on the desk nearby. After a long moment, I carried the letters into my office and set them beside the computer. Then I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked on an empty page. For several seconds, I didn't type anything. I just looked at Eleanor's final returned letter. The black marker. The unopened envelope. The sentence that had traveled through 2 decades to find me. Slowly, I placed my hands on the keyboard, and for the first time, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. My phone rang while I was still working on the gala speech. Patricia Carter. For a second, I just stared at the screen. It was the first time I'd ever seen her name appear on my phone. Not through Jason, not through a lawyer, not through someone else. Directly. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hello? A brief silence followed. Then her voice, older than I remembered, but not softer. Emily. No apology, no hesitation, just my name. I leaned back in my chair. What do you want? She sighed dramatically. I don't understand why you're making this so difficult. That sentence told me everything. Not, how are you? Not, I'm sorry. Not, can we talk? Just frustration, as though I were the obstacle. The insurance issue isn't my fault, I said. It shouldn't even exist. It exists because Eleanor interfered. I froze. What? Her tone sharpened. That woman spent years keeping this family divided. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. Eleanor didn't abandon me at a bus station. That's not what happened. I laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh. It literally is what happened. Patricia ignored that. People sometimes do that when facts become inconvenient. If she hadn't kept digging up the past, we wouldn't be dealing with any of this. I glanced toward the letters sitting on my desk. The unopened envelope, the black marker, the evidence. Eleanor wrote 5 letters. Silence. Then Patricia said something that made my stomach turn. She should have stopped after the first one. Not regret, not guilt, annoyance, because someone had tried to keep a connection alive. I closed my eyes. 20 years. 20 years, and she still believed she was the victim. The conversation didn't last much longer. There wasn't really anywhere for it to go. Eventually, she hung up. Not because we reached understanding, because she'd failed to get what she wanted. I sat quietly for a while afterward. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Melissa, Jason's wife, the only member of that family who had at least attempted basic politeness. Can we talk? She asked. I almost said no. Instead, I agreed to a short call. Melissa sounded nervous. The kind of nervousness that comes from standing in the middle of someone else's disaster. I know everyone's handling this badly, she said. That's an understatement. Fair. At least she was honest. For a few minutes, she talked about Patricia's health, the medical bills, the property situation, the pressure on the family. Unlike Jason, she wasn't demanding. Unlike Patricia, she wasn't blaming. She sounded tired, genuinely tired. Then she said something that almost worked. People can make terrible decisions and still be complicated. I looked out my office window. The parking lot below was nearly empty. I know. Then maybe meet with her? For a moment, doubt slipped in. Not forgiveness, not trust, just doubt. The small voice that wonders whether refusing a final conversation might become a future regret. Melissa must have sensed it, because she softened her voice. You only get one mother? I stared at the letters, then at Eleanor's photograph on the bookshelf. You know what's strange? I said. What? I actually had two. Melissa didn't answer. Neither of us needed to. That conversation ended more gently than the first one. But the result was the same. Nothing changed. A few hours later, Helen called. Apparently, Jason had been busy. Again. Heard from 3 people today, Helen said. About what? About you. That wasn't encouraging. Jason had started telling people I was refusing to help a dying woman, that I was holding family assets hostage, that I was motivated by revenge. The story was spreading fast, not because it was true, because it was simple. Simple stories always travel faster. I expected the rumors to make me angry. Oddly enough, they didn't. I was too tired, too close to the truth, too close to the decision I'd already made. By midnight, I was alone in my office. The gala was less than 24 hours away. My laptop screen glowed in the darkness, and on it sat 2 different speeches. Version 1 was safe, professional, predictable. Thank the donors. Celebrate the children. Honor Eleanor's legacy. Everyone would applaud. Everyone would go home happy. Version 2 was different. Version 2 included the letters. The bus station. The lies. The truth. Not for revenge, not for humiliation, for accuracy. I read both versions several times. Then I printed them. 1 stack in my left hand, 1 stack in my right. Across the room, Eleanor's photograph sat on the bookshelf. The same warm smile, the same calm eyes. For a long moment, I stood there looking at both speeches. Then I walked toward the shredder and fed one of them into the machine. At 9, my parents abandoned me at a bus station with just a sketchbook. 20 years later, they tricked me into a meeting because they needed my signature for the family insurance. I showed the whole town their old letter. Stop contacting us. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old now, and for most of my life, I avoided bus stations. Not because I was afraid of buses, because the last time my family felt like a family ended at 1. I was 9 years old when my mother took me to Cedar Creek Station. It was a small terminal on the edge of town. A few benches, a ticket counter, and buses coming and going all day. Back then, I thought we were taking a trip together. That morning, my mother, Patricia, told me to pack a bag. I didn't know what to bring. So I grabbed my favorite sketchbook and a short pencil. That was it. When I got into the car, my older brother Jason was already in the front seat. He was 12. The drive was quiet. The radio played softly while nobody explained where we were going. Are we visiting someone? I asked. No answer. A few minutes later, I tried again. How long are we staying? My mother sighed. Emily, just relax. So I stopped asking. When we arrived, she parked beside the terminal and shut off the engine. Then she turned toward me. Grab your bag. I picked up my sketchbook and followed her outside. A cold breeze moved through the parking lot. My oversized jacket did little to help. We stopped beside an empty bench. Sit here, she said. I sat. She exchanged a quick glance with Jason. One of those silent conversations that made it obvious everyone knew something except me. Stay here for a little while. Okay? Don't go anywhere. I won't. She nodded and turned away. Jason followed her back toward the car. I wasn't worried. Parents leave kids alone for a few minutes all the time. Maybe they were buying tickets. Maybe they forgot something. The engine started. I waited. The car backed out. I waited. Then Jason rolled down his window. I give her 10 minutes. My mother looked at him. 5. They both laughed. I frowned. Jason leaned farther out. You want to bet? My mother shook her head. No, she'll last longer than 5. Then Jason looked directly at me. Don't cry, Emily. The car drove away. At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe they'd circle around the lot. Maybe they were trying to scare me. So I waited. 5 minutes. 10, 20. The smile slowly disappeared. People came and went. Buses arrived and left. Nobody came back for me. I watched every car that entered the parking lot. Every time headlights appeared, my heart jumped. Every time, it was someone else. An hour passed, then another. The air got colder. I opened my sketchbook and started drawing random lines just to keep busy. My hands wouldn't stay steady. I kept looking toward the road, still waiting. Eventually, I checked inside the terminal. Maybe I'd somehow missed them. Maybe they were waiting for me in there. They weren't. I returned to the bench and sat down again. That's the strange thing about being a child. You keep believing your parents are coming back even when everything says they aren't, because the alternative is too big to understand. The sky was beginning to darken when I finally noticed a woman sitting several benches away. Gray streaks in her hair, reading glasses pushed onto her head, a paperback book open in her lap. I wasn't sure how long she'd been there. For a while, she simply watched. Not in a creepy way, more like she was trying to figure something out. I looked away. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Slow, unhurried. She stopped beside my bench, then she sat down. Not too close, just close enough. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned toward me and asked, "Have you eaten today?"